Good afternoon, and welcome to Examining a Vendor Data Center and Colocation Model, a three-part webinar series. Today we have part one for you, to collocate or not to collate your IT infrastructure, making the decision. This is a webinar tweet chat combo from HealthSystemCIO.com, sponsored by Iron Mountain. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of HealthSystemCIO.com. And I will be your moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat hosted by Nancy Wilcox, our Director of Sales and Marketing. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag HSCIOchat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the Media Viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A panel today. You can type in questions as they occur to you and send them in, leave the default set to all panelists. We will take them later in the program, but again, send them in as they occur to you. And you can download the deck by using the URL on your screen, and it's at the bottom of our slides, and it's being sent out in the chat box. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, we're going to have our featured panel discussion with Daniel Morreale, VP and CIO at Hunterdon Healthcare System, Art Ream, Senior Director of IT Applications and CISO with Cambridge Health Alliance, and Chris Bair, VP of Iron Mountain Data Centers. So let's jump right in. And Dan, let me start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and role?
Sure. Hunterdon Healthcare System is a moderate-sized system in central New Jersey. We have a 178-bed hospital, but on the ambulatory side have 65 separate locations and do about 1 million ambulatory visits a year. My role as VP and CIO is responsible for all technology and data across the health system and across the 5 separate companies within the health system.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. Art?
Sure. Cambridge Public Health Department is Cambridge Health Alliance for the City of Cambridge. We have 3 hospital system in Cambridge, Everett, and Somerville with 15 clinics, 140 patients in the larger Metro North area. We are a HIMSS level 6 inpatient and a level 7 ambulatory facility, NCQA. We, like I mentioned, we are the Public Health Commission for the City of Cambridge. We have a large behavioral health population and one of the safety net hospitals for the state of Massachusetts. My role here is the Senior Director of Applications. I'm responsible for part of the portfolio of applications we run here, primarily the Epic and the clinical side of things, as well as the CISO, so the security of the Alliance, and I work with the Chief Compliance and Chief Privacy Officers in concert to manage that obligation.
Very good. Thank you, Art. Chris?
I'm Chris Bair. I'm responsible for the data center product within Iron Mountain. Iron Mountain is an S&P 500 company. We've been around 67 years. We have 230,000 customers located across 52 countries and about 90 million square feet of secure space that we manage across that portfolio. The data center division, the one that I am working within at Iron Mountain, has 11 facilities located across 3 continents and about 2 million total square feet of production data center space. We primarily focus on heavily regulated industries, which are sort of our typical customers, throughout the Iron Mountain portfolio, who tend to also be our data center customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Looking forward to our discussion. Art, let's start with you. Give me your definition of what co-location is and perhaps some different arrangements it could take.
Sure. So, you can co-locate, in facilities, is my definition, basically for IT services or, sometimes any other services, but we particularly have it started out originally here as a co-location in a couple of facilities here that we would manage. Eventually moving to a larger real estate opportunity that's outside of our system, that's managed and actually leases space, and then we co-locate our services external to the organization with a bunch of redundancy going from here to there for all of our services at this point in time. So it can take on an internal, I believe, and an external opportunity, depending on how you structure it for the organization as a whole.
I actually want to hear from everyone on this. So, Chris, what are your thoughts?
I think that Art did a much better job defining co-location than I can do, which is unfortunate given my profession. But he really did cover it well, right? It's putting your infrastructure in someone else's facility, and I've seen kind of within kind of the system of care discussion, I've seen people co-locate physicians and things like that, right? So I think his definition from an IT perspective is obviously great, and we tend to see kind of within our customer base deployment sizes and kind of application types and what they're doing with the cloud. It varies a great deal, sort of based on their needs. And interestingly enough, even as a co-location provider, Iron Mountain will, on occasion, co-locate with other offerings in order to be able to access a certain network and things like that. So it's just sort of an expedient way to get access to whatever it is you need to see: network, cloud, power, et cetera.
Dan, does that sound about right, or do you have any other thoughts?
It does sound exactly right, but let me highlight that one of the most significant benefits in co-location is the ability to share power, cooling, and redundancy, which, as I'm sure everyone knows, are probably the three most expensive aspects of a data center.
Very good. And Dan, I believe you are I mean, I've heard you talk about this for quite a while. You are a sort of a pro co-location, get out of the data center business kind of guy?
I very much want to be out of the data center business. And within Hunterdon, we're looking at a dual strategy of co-location and then a full cloud experience. And to that end, we've started splitting up some of our application suite between both models as we make improvements to our infrastructure and our processes and our own policies and standards. So yeah, I believe I don't want to own a data center by 2021.
Very good. I'm looking forward to talking more about that. Chris, let's go with you here. What types of organizations or IT environments are ripest for embracing co-locations, and are there any scenarios where it doesn't make sense?
Well, I mean, obviously what Dan said is it's fairly typical right now, and not just within healthcare, right? It is a really, I mean, everybody always wants to say it's a disruptive time, but I do think, having kind of been in IT infrastructure for about 22 years, that things are changing pretty quickly, and the move towards cloud or other on-demand or by the drink, or however you want to describe it, service offerings is changing how people are going to consume IT services across the board, right? Not just in healthcare. And so part of what kind of makes someone a pretty typical customer is they are cognizant of this change. They are looking to embrace the cloud. And when you move to an on-demand service offering there, when you look at your facilities, kind of like Dan is, when you double down on a facility and do a significant upgrade or go build a new one, that's a 15 to 20-year bet. That's a very, very long bet and a ton of infrastructure and something that's difficult to forecast in a time that's particularly disruptive. So what we typically see now, even out of very conservative organizations, is many times because of the level of change, organizations will come to us or one of our competitors to deploy a footprint. They'll have the term of that commitment with us match effectively their equipment life cycle, so it's pretty finite, 3 to 5 years, and they'll use that footprint in order to kind of be the platform for their hybrid cloud deployment, right? Because nobody has gone fully cloud yet. There's still applications that you can't or won't put on the cloud, but the ability to kind of say, I've got the infrastructure, the stability, I've got these expensive things, heating, cooling network handled, and I also know that I've made a bet as long as my equipment lease is out there, right, or however you acquire equipment. It seems like a pretty reasonable way for a lot of organizations to help manage the change.
Chris, as you're talking with customers, well, not customers, as you're talking with potential customers, do you run into many folks that just say, no, not interested, you know, doesn't make sense? I mean, or is it all, or most of them, it's just a question of pace and timing?
I think a couple of years ago, right, 5, 10 years ago, you had more organizations that had just kind of always had a monolithic data center or a couple of big internal facilities and had done it well and had kind of been able to say it doesn't make sense yet. I just think really the cloud and the pressure around on-demand compute, right, or kind of network access by the drink cloud type offerings is so great that there's less resistance now.
Okay, very good. Dan, let's go with you on this. What do you think are the main upsides of embracing colocation?
Well, I think the advantages are really pretty simple. I can minimize my capital expenditures by not having to build a new data center. I know that my machines, my servers and storage and the network are in a secure facility that is, as a facility, managed and secure, probably to a better extent that I could physically secure my own environment. And it just gives me that comfort level that my equipment is out there and it is being monitored on, a 7/24 basis. Which, of course, is critical to being able to provide a positive user experience to my constituencies.
Very good, very good. All right, thank you, Dan. Art, let's go to this one. What are some of the concerns CIOs and CISOs, such as yourself, have around embracing colocation?
Yeah, I think you got to pay attention to, the facility and a well-designed facility. I know when we had embarked on our co-location opportunity, which we did, which gave us, everything that Daniel and Chris have actually commented on, the flexibility to move things around, the better cooling systems, infrastructure that surrounds that. You've got the security component. You got to think about, your drawbacks of, okay, do I have to travel to the colo today? I mean, obviously we have, remote systems that we can get into 99% of all of this, but every once in a while somebody's got to go there. How far of a trip is it? What's it take out of your productivity time for those engineers that would actually go up there? But more importantly, we had experienced some unfortunate events to whereas, when you talk about power and infrastructure feeds, if the main power coming into the building is fed from 2 different circuits, that's great. But when it's not, it becomes a problem. And that became a problem once for us in a really large, very high class end data center that somebody just did an oops. Things like that can be tragic not only for, your institution, but, when we talk co-location, we could talk hundreds of people, from any industry that spans that location. So I think those are some of the concerns that you vet out ahead of time, and anybody can make mistakes, but you just got to be cognizant of that. And then, like everybody says, outside of that, you look at the investment over time, you're getting a better bang for your buck. I mean, nobody in the hospital business and most industries want to run a data center. I mean, when I was at, UMass Memorial, that was an enormous data center that, I remember working in there. When you hear quiet, that's when you go, oh, what's going to happen now? You never want to hear that in a data center. I mean, ever. I'll be frank with you. As a computer operator, I hated silence. I understand the challenges of people that run these places because they actually have to deal with the utilities and the infrastructure and the state and everything that's feeding these places. So they can be a great opportunity, but there's also opportunities there for, things to happen, which we've experienced in the past that are out of your control. And I think you just need to realize that and set the tone when you go into them.
Chris, you want to give your thoughts on that?
I think, again, it's, as Art described, it's pretty accurate. It's they might have concerns. I think if anything, that my experience with healthcare providers, and before I was here, I spent a couple years running products for a behavioral health, electronic health records company. I think a lot of it's compliance and familiarity, right? There are some really good providers or some really good facilities. If I've seen an objection at other places, not necessarily here at Iron Mountain, because we typically have kind of a compliance framework in place with most of the healthcare providers. It's just that a more real estate-oriented co-location provider doesn't have, you know, the ability to execute a BAA and little things like that that are, you know, big things for a provider to have in place. That would typically be that in familiarity. Just, hey, it looks fine. We don't know the vendor. We don't have a contractual relationship with them. We're doing a vendor consolidation, kind of tactical things like that that could make people less willing to lean forward on colo.
Very good, very good. All right, Art, I'm going to go back to you over here. With the number of health systems having their IT system comprised by ransomware increasing, is data security a viable explanation for keeping IT infrastructure in-house, or does it make you want to offload it? So I think that's one of the fundamental questions around security. To Chris's point, it depends on who you select, right? I mean, you can offload it and make your security much better, or you can make it probably worse.
Yeah, I think you know, you got to understand that, you know, if you do your due diligence through your selection process, ultimately you're going to improve your security controls. Largely, having them on site, they're subjected to environmental concerns, you know, in the hospitals or anywhere around that. But I mean, they're subjected to it up there. But the facilities are built and handled differently. But also the controls going inbound to these facilities. I mean, you know, there's only a select number of people with the controls put around it from your organization that can get into that. And then once you get into that, you can only get into your part of that facility. Now, from a, you know, a security standpoint, I mean, everybody still has access to the computers, don't get me wrong. I mean, we're still working on them, even though they're co-location. I think from a security perspective, a lot of risk resides with your, you know, your user base. I mean, I am a big proponent of the fact that's our biggest risk. Is our human factor, probably myself included. I mean, I'm a CISO and I like to click on things. I mean, but you know, it happens. I mean, you know, you're going shopping for the day, but I'm being a realist here and saying that we're all human to making mistakes. But the more controls you put around it, which these facilities actually present to you, the better off you are there. And it allows you to use the best technology that you can from that perspective at these places that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily be able to afford, because everything is pooled and it's a shared resource. So I think your control goes up and your security goes up, and then your infrastructure is up to you to manage that in that location. And I think they give you an enhanced security overall.
Yeah, this is Daniel. I have to say that I couldn't agree more with Arthur, and that was part of the concepts that we explored and worked through as we decided to move a couple of our products to a co-location site.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Dan. Chris, we're going to go with you here. Everyday technology gets more powerful. Are some of the concerns, perhaps legitimate concerns, that folks had, you mentioned 5 years ago, texting and the attitudes towards co-location, are some of those things dated? And I guess, do they get more dated every day?
I think the changes in technology are certainly a driving factor. You know, I don't want to beat to death the cloud or the on-demand, so that's one. And the other thing is, I think everyone across all sectors, we're seeing 40 to 50%, you know, CAGR or annual growth rate in storage, which tends to drive a 10 to 15% increase in your electrical consumption, right? So even organizations that have a nice physical footprint still have to put a lot of capital into these facilities in order to upgrade them to handle this increased electrical load and cooling and the rest. So I think, you know, kind of at a very basic tactical level, massive storage and network increase drives smaller, right, because of efficiencies and systems being better, but still 10 to 15% annual electrical consumption change. It just makes it more likely. So I don't know if it's outdated as much as it is. The momentum is such that it's getting harder and harder to sort of rationalize.
Very good. All right, Dan, let's go with you here. As EMR vendors continue to improve their cloud delivery model, do you see a tipping point where the healthcare industry fully embraces a hybrid cloud framework for IT?
No, you know, actually, I think we're already at the tipping point. and it may not be predicated on the EMR vendors, but so many of the boutique and sub-EMR products that we use are easily compatible with either cloud or co-location services. If you look upon the limited number of large EMR vendors, you know, both of those environments will live well. Colo, whether hosted by me or hosted by the vendor. So I think we're there already, and we don't have to wait for the tipping point.
Okay, very good. All right, Chris, let's go with you on the next one. Does entering into a co-location agreement mean the ability to reduce staff? And if so, can those staff be retrained or reassigned?
I think it depends, right? I think we've seen, specific to healthcare and here at Iron Mountain, we've seen organizations that are just growing a great deal, and they have the classic old data center in the basement of the main hospital, but they've picked up tons of satellite campuses and you know, other systems that are going to work with them. And I've seen them move away from kind of the old monolithic disaster recovery from one of the big service providers based in Philadelphia or somewhere else, and move towards a second site, but instead of using it as a cold or a DR site, I've seen them leverage the remote site to do co-production, right? And so in one really nice case with a provider in New Jersey, they serve most of the folks within the proper hospital building, the main campus building, right out of the old data center, and then the replicated infrastructure that's located a state away, they use to serve everyone outside of that main campus. So they reduce their network costs, better latency, and then better overall service. And then should they have a disaster in their case, instead of trying to start up a cold site or even, you know, kind of the old tape-based DR thing that used to happen a couple of years ago. They've already got a system up and running that would and it would be slower probably, but it's able to serve the whole system, you know, with a pretty quick redirect. And so those folks didn't reduce headcount, but they also picked up kind of twice the workload. I just think it sort of depends on kind of what you're hoping to accomplish and how you look at your existing facilities.
So Dan, would you say that this issue is a driver or not a driver in co-location?
No, I think it's a driver, because if we're seriously looking at providing a robust experience for our users, we have to look at means by which we can improve redundancy, improve stability, improve reliability. And I think both a colo and in more advanced cases a cloud solution give that level of comfort and support in the infrastructure, because now we start to think of our infrastructure you know, as a service and less of a physical environment. And to pick up on Chris's point, Hunterdon did exactly that of which he spoke. We took our ambulatory practice solution first out of the box and moved it to a co-location site off campus. And then we are continuing to provide the on-campus experience through, you know, one of our two data centers on premises. It was a great first step.
Very good, very good. All right, Art, let's go over to you. Assuming the CIO or CISO is a believer, how can co-location be sold to the rest of the C-suite and board? And I guess the underlying premise, is it something that is a little difficult to sell to some folks?
I think it's pretty easy to sell. I mean, the selling point, I think, is initially the look is that you're losing control of a investment and an infrastructure when actually you're just trying to reposition it to a new location. That, you know, you may pay a little bit more, you may not have an FTE reduction, but you could redirect those FTEs that are otherwise doing, you know, data center management, cooling management, and the likes like that. I mean, because, you know, I mean, when we had it here, I mean, we had our current infrastructure HVAC people dealing with the power. Somebody's got to manage the power in, out, the redundancy, the air conditioning units down there. So with that fee, you get a better, and you're constantly upgrading them, making sure that the facilities are okay, the power is different, and managing that infrastructure. You take all of those costs, redirect those FTEs to doing other stuff in the hospital that there certainly needs to do, including from systems, infrastructure facilities, you redirect that to other opportunities in the hospital that get done or in the organization. Let's not just say hospital. You offload that up to there and you pay a fee, that handles that for you. You get the latest and greatest. Like I said before, the pooled utility of having all that money from all these organizations pooled in one place to purchase the best, the latest, the greatest, and maintain it. If you've got that relationship up there, your colo, it's the best of both worlds. I mean, if I, sitting in a C-suite, I'd do it in a minute. I mean, even if it was costing a little bit more because there's opportunity there. And then that space I don't have to worry about. And, my redundancy and safety is in a better position. So I think it's an easy sell, frankly.
Well, it should be good news to a lot of people that want to move forward with this. Chris, let's go with you here. In your opinion, have healthcare organizations been more or less or equally likely to adopt third-party data center co-location? We're talking about compared to other industries, and why?
I think kind of like I inferred earlier, I would say maybe historically less, mostly due to having, serious existing investments in IT infrastructure and facilities and teams and people, because, it's a mission-critical environment, obviously, so there's a ton of competency there. I do think, kind of like I talked about before, I just think with the additional pressures and additional vendors out there that they're comfortable with or have a compliance framework with, I think that resistance is going away. And I think it's with just like everybody's described really well today, I don't want to reiterate, with the operational financial constraints and the drive to be efficient, I just feel like healthcare is quickly gaining ground.
Okay. I want to stick with you, Chris, here. Do healthcare providers have requirements that are different from other highly regulated organizations and industries?
Yeah, they do. Your alphabet soup is different from the alphabet soup we have with the financial services company, right? It's a different set of alphabet soup. The nice thing is the practices are the same for me as a provider, right? Just generally. It's kind of like every religion in the world kind of says none of them really encourage murder. It just seems like all the regulated, it's pretty good, right? It's all kind of consistent around controls and access and documentation and the best practices that kind of formulate the compliance framework tends to require very similar behavior out of us.
Very good, very good. All right, Dan. Where have you seen healthcare organizations struggle to manage their IT infrastructure and data centers?
Well, thank you for the loaded question.
You got it.
I think in general, healthcare struggles with infrastructure and applications, if for no other reason than our investment in them tends to be lower than in other industries. I have a tendency to move from hospital to hospital. I like to go in and fix things that are not optimal. And I can't think of a hospital in the past 30 years that I have gone to that was ripe for an infrastructure replacement, ripe for a redesign, ripe for even building out data centers. And I think that is the opportunity point where colo just actually starts to make sense. Infrastructures, I believe, are typically less robust than other industries, and colo gives us an advantage, the opportunity to leapfrog a couple of steps and start to catch up.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Dan. All right, Art, let's go over to you. What are the catalysts for co-location? What happens to make healthcare providers move from historically internal enterprise data centers to a third party? So are there sometimes incidents, events, anything specific that gets somebody moving?
Yeah, I think particularly if you've got a DR site that it's at one facility, and then you've got your main data center at another, and then one facility loses connectivity due to infrastructure to the data center or the infrastructure in the data center. I think it's really difficult to maintain the failure points, which there's multiple. I think when you co-locate, like I said, back to the facility and the equipment and everything that you gain from that, I think providers, and largely, due to some of the savings, you can increase your computing power and the better the better computers that you have up there. I mean, you can start to move to a bunch of virtual machines when nobody knows an interruption when some CPU fails. And whereas if you have these boxes down here that are in your data center, you know, a rack fails or a switch fails, there's not a whole lot of redundancy, you know, because it's expensive to maintain all of that. So I think that's selling point from providers is that, you know, their EHR is not going to go down, or their, you know, their particular applications are not going to go down. They're going to switch, you know, over. And it's easier to maintain that and use that technology that way.
Very good. Dan, do you think that it's usually something bad has to happen? And maybe it's unfortunate, but it's just human nature to get people moving?
No, certainly that helps. But I don't think we're dependent upon that. I think any organization faced with the prospect of building a new data center or doing a rip and replace on most of their infrastructure can come to a financial justification on why to co-locate. So yeah, I mean, disasters help, but I think there's enough opportunity before you get there, before you reach the disaster point.
Yeah, and I second that. What I've seen is, you know, we can do, anybody in the industry should be able to do a pretty fair and even-handed kind of build versus buy for a rip and replace or a new facility. And when we run these numbers across all industries, and even when we use kind of the cost of capital from a nonprofit, which is, you know, half of any for-profit at least, you know, kind of just a borrowing cost is a cost of capital. If you're building anything less than a 6 megawatt data center, which is kind of 100,000 feet of raised floor or non-raised floor, right? But, you know, this is a major sort of cloud-sized deployment, right? It's cheaper to go third party, and not just me, really the industry. It's less expensive because of people staffing network, right? And the ability to be one of many in a site. It's just less. And then forecasting's tough. You know, that's another thing is, even if you say, hey, we've got tons of capital, we want to do it, and there's, you know, the county wants us to keep, you know, IT jobs, we're going to look at it. It's just really hard to know what to build, right? Because of all the change happening and the ongoing increase in your demands. So it just seems like it doesn't take a disaster. It just takes coming to the realization and going, hey, this is a point where we got to decide what we're going to do long term, and it's just hard to make that long-term bet.
Very good. All right, we have an audience question I want to jump to right now. Also want to encourage our audience to go ahead and send in your questions, and we will get to them. First question, and Chris, we'll go with you on this. Have you seen that the co-location organization, such as yours, picks up the staff that are no longer needed within the organization they are taking over? I'm not sure about all the wording on that, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah, we've certainly hired, with the blessing, right, employees of a customer before. Again, we typically have mutual non-solicit, so it's not something we can do, you know, without kind of coordination and blessing. But we're not. When you think of like a classic IT outsourcer, the old EDS and organizations like that, that's certainly not us, right? Part of how we drive, kind of like I said, it's less expensive to go with me and those like me, is because we don't have to kind of linearly increase staffing, right? You know, we're able to be super efficient across a larger facility.
Right. So the idea is people should not really be thinking, I can just move these 10 people over to Iron Mountain.
Yeah, it's not typically a rebadge, right? And again, because we're not taking over, they're still your systems, right? It's still your applications, it's your stack, it's your security typically, right? You're just really using us as a place that you can kind of scale with a known cost, right? Easily handle chargebacks, things like that within your organization. But we're not a rebadge of your employee kind of IT outsourcing company. It's not who we are. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not what we do.
And let's, what a segue. Then Chris, let's stick with you on this. What are the soft benefits of making a move? And you're talking about network support, staffing, capacity planning, chargebacks, et cetera.
Yeah, I think all of those. I think those are all really good examples, right? Because there's lots of network coming in, and lots of providers in there, right? It's sort of like buying at Costco. As you think about acquiring network, you don't have to sit and go, I got to give this person X in order to finance them to build into our building and, you know, drag fiber in and equipment. It's also more competitive, right? Because you can choose to source from multiple cloud providers, multiple network providers, et cetera. So things you're getting outside of, you know, the relationship with Iron Mountain, it's still like you're buying at Costco versus some, you know, fishing store in the middle of nowhere where a Coke costs you $1.50 because it's the only place around. I also think it really is, it's interesting when you start thinking from a chargeback perspective and the rest, because an internal facility, your costs aren't linear, right? You'll hit a point where the next rack necessitates a UPS, a generator, more space, et cetera. So it's not like adding a couple more kilowatts to support someone who needs a new application is going to be kind of that's a predictable chargeback. It could be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars with the next increment. And it just gets simplified, you know, because again, you're basically getting data center as a service, just like you do other as a service or cloud offerings.
Very good. All right, Dan, let's go with you here. What are the costs of taking a wait-and-see approach to co-location? So if you're a CIO out there and you're saying, just not ready yet, just hang out and see what happens, what are the dangers there?
So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that because I'm not a wait-and-see kind of guy. So we just kind of push forward. I can tell you this, that our journey started out looking to be entirely cloudy. And to kind of skip the co-location model in its entirety. But when I stopped to consider the concerns of my CTO, and let's face it, he's the guy that's getting, you know, whose phone is ringing at 2 o'clock in the morning when something goes down, we thought it to be more prudent to do this in increments. Let's understand the benefits of cloud and colo. Let's move to colo, that which makes sense. And let's have that experience before we decide the next step. For me, that's a prudent way of moving forward. Is it going to cost me a little bit more money in my TCO over 10 years? Probably, but I think it's also going to help me avoid some mistakes in the process. So I'm expecting a happy balance at the end of that time period.
Very good.
Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah.
Was that at all coherent? Okay, all right.
I think I'll give it a thumbs up. Let's go with Art on this audience question. What components remain on site, and particularly how do you handle the interface engine and images?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So so our interface engine actually is sitting up physically in the co-located data center, and it runs on virtual machines. Our PAX images and our SANs and our storage is actually up there as well, images such as that. So most of our images are links back and forth between us and them. Or our colo. We don't, you know, the pipes that are between us, we don't see any latency or any problems with that across the board. So overall, I think the experience as far as that, from transferring large images and stuff like that, is really, really well, because, you know, your EHR is sitting up there too, and you're serving up the screen back down here. So stuff that remains on site, I think largely we're seeing, you know, the stuff that has to be on the white boxes that we can't change out to a virtual machine because it doesn't run on that. You can't put any of your lab or your analyzers or anything on that because those individual servers and anything need to be next to the, you know, the overall instruments and how that runs. And then you're transferring, obviously, back to your EHR through your interface engine. Hopefully that answered the question.
Very good, I think so. All right, we're going to do our new exciting feature here, Ask a Co-Panelist. Dan, let's start with you. You have a question for one of your co-panelists?
So my question is really this. Assuming that I don't want to deal with the financial return on investment, the financial ROI, what are some of the other value propositions that would make sense to pitch to a C-suite in order to inform and get consensus.
Art, you want to start?
Yeah, I think, well, your ROI, no, this is a hard question. Thank you.
Hey, you want to think about it, and I'll give a bad answer, and then you can give a good answer?
Yeah, you can go with that because clearly I'm not going to market my co-location site that I'm opening up real good here.
No. My answer sounds a little flippant, and it's not meant to be. But any industry, again, not just healthcare. It's funny. And I started out after the military, like a lot of military folks. I got into IT infrastructure. Right? I don't know why. It's certainly not because we have control issues. And so, and I was an operator, right? And it's funny because I never ever had any person call up and say, hey, that was some good data center today, right? If anybody senior in the org called, it was because outage or overage or one of my people did something dumb, right? It was nobody ever said good job. And it's because the data center is a utility, just like, and this is my real answer, nobody goes, hey, I got great water this morning, right? You only notice it when it costs more or when it doesn't come out of the tap. And so to me, there are very few organizations, and I really am talking kind of the mega cloud providers, Facebook, Google, et cetera, that their data center is a differentiator, like it's their product, it comes out of there all the time. I think for everyone else, it's a utility, and really organizationally, it just represents a downside, right? It's expected to be perfect, right? And when it's not, it's just downside. And so I think that's a lot of why psychologically it's easier to let go.
All right, Art,
okay.
We got psychology in there. What do you got?
Well, I think from, I think overall, like you said, it was, I'll go on the utility theme, it is, in fact, you have to think about it as in fact, a utility. I mean, it is something, it's an expense, it's an overhead. The return on investment, let's say we can forget about that. It's a utility that you must have in order to run your business. And if it's safer, and, there is no comment about it, like the water comment, there is no, you gave great data center this, today, that type of thing. And if it's transparent, I think that's your selling point. It's transparency. You'll never know it's there, obviously, until it goes bad, which, happens every once in a while. But for the majority of the point, it's there. It's your utility. And if it's transparent and nobody ever sees it and nobody ever realizes it, that's your return on investment. It's when you start having your infrastructure here in the hospital and having to maintain it, and it's a constant something in somebody's face and a constant expense that occasionally or more often than not becomes non-transparent. In other words, it comes to the forefront. That's pretty much the selling point, I guess.
I hope you got something there to use, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, your chance. Ask a co-panelist.
All right, so both you guys have out-tasked, right? You've done some co-location as you think about it, and let's do both sides. What's been a better than expected, and what was worse than expected, and a lesson learned?
Dan, you want to start off?
Sure. When I moved my ambulatory product to a co-location site, the actual transition went way better than I expected. Moving that boatload of data from New Jersey to Ohio, we thought it was going to take a whole lot longer, but we were able to accomplish that in less time than we published. The downside that we experienced is that the co-location vendor failed to provide, by accident, divergent access for my fiber into their building, so that both my primary and redundant fiber are hanging off the same telephone pole, which 2 weeks after the transition caught fire and brought us down for a little bit of time. So that was just a kind of reminder that we needed to do even more homework and be more diligent in those final steps of the transition. It never occurred to me that that would be something I would have to follow up upon.
Art?
Yeah, I'd have to capitalize on the fact that the ease of use, the move of data, and the location of that, and the fast ability to move data around really resonated with us. And if we have to go down to move data back and forth to servers, but the one thing that we did experience was that oops that I mentioned early on in the conversation. Half the data center was fed by the same grid. And that grid, when that grid went down, the generators, came on, and then they had a failure, but there's no redundant power on one side of the data center, the side of the data center that we were on. So they soon realized their discrepancy in that case, and I think the end result of it was the fact that the utility themselves made some infrastructure changes external to the data center and failed to realize that they were feeding the two circuits from the same fail point. So, those things are going to happen. There's nothing you can get around from that, but I think you just need to recognize the fact that things like that can happen despite everybody's due diligence.
All right, let me follow up with you real quick. What's your advice for a CIO that goes ahead with some engagement like this, goes out on a limb or not, depending on how you think of it, and there's an issue like you or Dan described, and could you get sort of an I told you so, and how would you deal with that?
Well, you're going to get the I told you so, that it's not under your control and all of that. I mean, that's going to come. I mean, I think the important part is that you're upfront and immediately address it. So when you know it happened, you're in front of everybody and say, this was the problem, this was what was messed up, and this is the remediated effect of it. It's also important to tie it to the fact that it can still happen whether I own it and it's in one of my facilities.
Right.
I mean, it can still happen here. I mean, it doesn't negate it. We're humans. It shouldn't happen, and it shouldn't have happened. But the fact of the matter is, we're humans. We designed it, and therefore, these things happen. And if it's in my place, it can happen the same thing. And I think that's important to get in front of them and say, this is what happened, and this is where we are. And I think you'll get the support. You're always going to have the skepticism in there, guaranteed.
Very good. All right, Art, I believe it's your turn to ask a co-panelist.
All right. So based on all of this discussion about co-location, the hardest, I think, process is, do you see your organizations from an infrastructure standpoint struggling to understand, and this is more, I think, towards Chris, do you see your infrastructure people struggling to bridge the gap between the technical suite that the healthcare industry or entity has? So in other words, I've got a set of engineers that are not completely up to speed with what the technology is you have up there and trying to negotiate that and configure that. I see that as a problem across the board.
Chris?
Makes sense. Yeah, I think as sort of a purer provider of co-location, I think it is somewhat easier for us because ultimately customers' environment, like the size of it, right, and the capacity that you can put in there, it's all, we rationalize around how much IT load you're going to actually draw. Right? It really is sort of consumption-based, right? And because the facility's built, and we know, hey, here's the density. It's a 200 watts per foot, room, and thusly, this is how we allocate it. And so that's pretty simple with us. In past lives, like I mentioned, I was, at a SaaS EHR company. I saw more struggle there because, in a good way, right? We had more complex conversations, and we were talking about outcomes and things like that, not just simply how many kilowatts and are we going to cool it and how tall and what kind of power and the rest. We tend to be simpler, right? And I know I'm making myself look dumb with that answer, but it's sort of true. I am in fact a little dumb, and it is simple, right? It's just the hardest part for our providers oftentimes isn't, because you guys know what your load is today, right? It really is. Typically, you're going to do a re-architect. You're going to usually move in when you go to a different set of IT equipment. And so a lot of times you're just not sure at that point, right? But it's typically fairly easy once the parties understand that.
All right. Very good.
Okay.
Dan, did you address Chris's question? Did you address Art's question?
You know, it was so long ago, I'm afraid I don't remember it.
Come on, Art, give us a refresher.
So I was saying bridging the gap between you know, your institution's infrastructure staff and the staff and the infrastructure technology that's at the co-location, and trying to configure that. There's gaps in, obviously, knowledge. I mean, it's not going to be the same technology across the board. You're not necessarily installing, you know, the same switches and everything up there that you would be down here. So is there a gap or a problem in that area, I guess?
Well, yes, to a certain extent, but I don't know that it's all that significant. We relied on, we knew there would be transitions with hardware and configurations and challenges. So kind of preemptively, we went out and bought resources that could help us do that work. We ended up having some security protocol challenges that took us a few weeks to resolve. But I think that's something that you can expect as your platforms change, your commands, your structures, your configs, the way it operates, have nuanced differences that can, you know, bubble up to manifest a bigger problem. So, you know, for us it was, we know that's going to happen, let's get some resources on board who are current and can help us with that.
All right. Well, excellent. We are just about out of time. This was a wonderful event, and I want to remind everyone listening that this is part one in a three-part series that we're doing on this topic. And the other parts will continue with the process of deciding to co-locate, which was the focus of this event, and the subsequent events will focus on how to move forward with that and then how to optimize it. So definitely go to our website on our webinar page and sign up for those other two events. When you close out your WebEx window today, you're going to be taken to a post-event survey. If you could answer that, we'd appreciate it. Regarding continuing education, attending our events gets you 1 CEU towards the CHIME CHCIO certification program. And if you need another certificate of attendance for another CEU program, you can use the final slide in this deck, and you'll get an email when the archive of this event has been posted to our YouTube channel. If you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can contact Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to view our upcoming schedule, as I mentioned. So with that, I want to thank our panel, Dan Morreale, Art Ream, and Chris Bair. I want to thank Iron Mountain for sponsoring today's event and the other two parts in this three-part series, and I want to thank you, our attendees, for joining us. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.